Hey, good morning, everyone. Really good to see you again. I'm Anne-Marie Green alongside Vladimir Duthier. So, Vlad, history being made again. President Trump is wrapping up his single term, and he's been impeached twice so far.
President of the United States now holds the distinction of being the only president in the 244-year history of the United States of America to be impeached twice, Anne-Marie, as you say. And it is remarkable that in the 4 years that President Trump has been in office, and you heard some of his achievements, if you want to call them that, celebrated by his supporters on the floor of the House of Representatives yesterday, those Republicans who voted against the impeachment articles. But now he holds the distinction of being the first president to be impeached twice, losing the presidency, losing the United States Senate, the majority in the United States Senate, and also losing the majority in the House of Representatives during his 4 years in office. And this now impeachment of the President of the United States means that his case will now head to the United States Senate for yet another trial. He's accused of inciting last week's deadly riot at the U.S. Capitol after months of making false claims about the presidential election. 10 House Republicans joined their Democratic colleagues by voting in favor of impeaching the president. However, it's unclear right now how many Senate GOP lawmakers will vote. Nancy Cordes is following the latest on Capitol Hill.
In a letter to his Republican colleagues Wednesday afternoon, Leader McConnell said, "I have not made a final decision on how I will vote, and I intend to listen to the legal arguments when they are presented to the Senate."
Those in favor say aye.
Those arguments will likely sound a lot like what we heard in the House as members voted to impeach President Trump in the same chamber where they cowered in fear 1 week ago.
There must be consequences for last week's treason and sedition.
The attack on the Capitol and the Congress was the single most depraved betrayal of the U.S. Constitution ever committed by a president.
All the Democrats voted to impeach, plus 10 Republicans, including a party leader, a new member, a staunch conservative, and moderates, like Washington State's Dan Newhouse.
There was a domestic threat at the door of the Capitol, and he did nothing to stop it.
Afterwards, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi spoke at the lectern that had been recovered after a rioter swiped it last week.
The House demonstrated that no one is above the law, not even the President of the United States.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol.
The sole article of impeachment accuses the president of inciting an insurrection last Wednesday that killed 5 people and put his own vice president in harm's way.
The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob.
Republican leader Kevin McCarthy agreed the president was to blame, but
I believe impeaching the president in such a short time frame would be a mistake.
Others argued Mr. Trump didn't deserve the punishment.
If we impeached every politician who gave a fiery speech to a crowd of partisans, this Capitol would be deserted.
What's being debated is whether, with 167 hours left until he leaves office, is he a clear and present danger? And he clearly isn't.
Resolution is adopted without
objection. But they were outnumbered, and now the resolution goes to the Senate for a trial that could start late next week.
So Nancy Cordes is joining us now from Capitol Hill. Nancy, as we saw in your report, Senator Mitch McConnell says that he'll consider convicting President Trump. It's quite a message. So what does the timeline look like in terms of a trial in the Senate?
Well, that is still somewhat up in the air. Good morning, Anne-Marie and Vlad. Basically, he says he's not bringing the Senate back early. So the soonest that this trial could get underway would be next week, January 19th, the day before President Biden is inaugurated. That's the day that the Senate comes back into session. But even if they were to get started right on that day, and I think that that's still very much up in the air, the first day of a Senate trial is really basically ceremonial. The House carries the article of impeachment over to the Senate. The Senate is there to accept it. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is there. They do a couple of little procedural measures, but they don't actually start arguing the case until the next day, typically. And that would be Inauguration Day. And, as you can imagine, senators have their hands full on that day. So I can't see an impeachment trial actually taking place on that day either. So, things are still very fluid. It appears pretty clear at this point that the Senate is most likely to begin this trial in earnest after President Trump has left office, when we are into the Biden administration, and when we are into Democratic control of the Senate, because by then these two senators who have just been elected in the state of Georgia their wins will have been certified, and they will have been sworn in here on Capitol Hill, giving Democrats control of the Senate. So they'll be the ones overseeing this trial.
So, Nancy, having covered Congress for as long as you have, you know the majority leader. I'm just trying to get in his head a little bit here and try to understand what he's signaling. It felt to me as if the video message that President Trump released yesterday was really being directed at an audience of one, Mitch McConnell. We know that the Senate majority leader and the president are not really speaking, or at least have not spoken in quite some time. We know that he is angry at losing, obviously, the majority in the United States Senate. The question I have is, do we really think that Mitch McConnell signaling to the press, signaling to the President of the United States that he's open to hearing the evidence suggests that he might vote to convict the President of the United States? Or the contrarian view is he throws it out there. This brings President Trump into line, at least for the next 7 days. And then once Chuck Schumer's in charge and Mitch McConnell is hands off, he can do what most people expect him to do, which is to not vote to convict the president.
Right. I think he's playing his hand very close to the vest at this moment. It could go either way. I think you're absolutely right that part of the ambiguity is meant to keep President Trump in line in this final week in office. And I think it's very unclear what the Senate leader will do at the end of the day. And we're not the only ones who are watching, because a lot of Senate Republicans are going to watch for his signals as they decide which way they're going to vote. A handful of them have already come out and said that they're going to vote against conviction, but most of them are watching and waiting. Even the ones who said that they were opposed to this impeachment process, who said that they didn't think that this was the right remedy. The reality now is it is going to come into their laps in the Senate, and they are going to have to sit on this jury and decide. So saying you're against impeachment is not the same thing as saying you're going to vote to acquit. Just yesterday in the House of Representatives, there was at least one Republican who said, I didn't want to go down this road. I would have rather censured the president, but this is what I have before me, so I'm going to go ahead and vote to impeach. So you don't have to like the process in order to decide at the end of the day that you believe that President Trump committed impeachable acts. And so that's the big question mark here, because you do need about 17 Republicans to vote with all the Democrats, if all the Democrats vote to convict, in order to remove him from office, which is going to be moot because he will have already left, but also to prevent him from running again in 2024.
So when it comes to sort of taking the temperature of Senate Democrats, Lindsey Graham also had something to say about this. He's clearly opposed to the impeachment process. I want to play some of that sound. He had a bit of an interview yesterday.
What's the trial going to look like? We're going to impeach Donald Trump after he's out of office. To the American people, what good comes from impeaching President Trump after he's out of office? That's an unconstitutional attack on the presidency. It will divide the country. It will incite violence. Why don't we impeach George Washington? He owned slaves. Where does this stop?
So
Apples
here, one of the things that we've been hearing from Republicans is kind of they're avoiding actually commenting on what the president did and whether or not what he did is an impeachable offense, and focusing on what they perceive will be the fallout. But I want to get sort of your take on what you're hearing from Senate Republicans in general, Nancy.
Well, first off, I don't know that I would put a lot of stock in Senator Graham's position on that one particular program, because he has been all over the map on this issue. Remember, it was just a few days ago where he said, I'm done, I'm through with this presidency, enough is enough. Then a few days later, he's flying on Air Force One with President Trump to Texas. He's the only lawmaker with him. Now, again, he's saying that we shouldn't impeach the president. So it's a little unclear exactly where he stands day to day. I do suspect at the end of the day he will probably vote to acquit. But, this is going to be a tough vote for a lot of Senate Republicans. On one hand, a number of them would like to get this weight off their back. They would like to not have to worry about what President Trump, former President Trump at that point, thinks every time they cast a vote over the next 4 years and what he's going to say about them. They would like to see his hold on the party reduced. On the other hand, he does have a big hold on the party. Recent polling shows that a lot of Republicans support what he did and said in the lead up to the insurrection at the Capitol last week. He is probably going to continue to have a lot of influence in the party. And, it is a very, very tough thing to vote to convict the president. And I think you're going to hear a lot from Senate Republicans what we heard from House Republicans yesterday, which is that A, you're sort of dancing on his grave. He's leaving anyway. Why do this? And B, that the president didn't really want anybody to get hurt, that can't be proven, that just because he was saying these things about the election for months and months, saying that incorrectly that he had won in a landslide, claiming without proof that there was widespread fraud and ginning up his supporters with the notion that somehow this election had been stolen from him and thereby from them. I think that you're going to hear some Republicans say that they still don't think that he wanted anyone to commit lawless acts and get anyone killed here at the Capitol last week.
So, Nancy, we have some questions, too, about the investigation into exactly what happened. But I just have one more question on those Republicans who voted to impeach the president. And a little bit of what you were just talking about right now, the notion that we as a country should not pursue a path to justice simply because the violence that was committed because the president of the United States lied to his supporters. So that violence happened. But you know what? We don't want any more violence to happen. So we probably shouldn't pursue this path. That doesn't seem to work when it's a prosecutor in any kind of case that is being tried in any of our courts. So I don't understand why people are using that argument now. The other question is, with those Republicans who voted, I think it's sort of telling that except for Katko in New York, who I believe is in a Biden district, the others had huge support of President Trump in their particular districts, and yet they still chose to do it, which kind of shows that it's perhaps not as difficult as some of these Republicans seem to be indicating to go against the grain, to go against President Trump, if these 9 Republicans were able to do that.
Right. I will say that one thing I noticed yesterday during the 2 hours of debate was that there weren't nearly as many House Republicans who were willing to come and stand up and speak against impeachment as there were Democrats who were willing to come and speak for it. This was only a 2-hour debate over impeachment, something that is the most consequential act that the House will ever do. And repeatedly during those 2 hours, the Republican who was leading his side of the debate, Jim Jordan of Ohio, had to say, we pass, we pass, we pass. Because clearly, while there were a lot of Republicans who were willing to vote against impeachment, there weren't a lot of Republicans who were willing to stand up and speak for posterity to say that they didn't believe that the president did anything wrong or that they felt that this punishment was too harsh. I thought that that was quite telling, and that was not the case the last time around. There were plenty of Republicans who were chomping at the bit to come out and speak on behalf of this president. So that was a notable change for me. I do think that among the Republicans who voted to impeach, they acknowledged that this was a very tough vote for them and a tough vote for their colleagues. They even said that, they understand the fears that some of their colleagues have that they could be targeted with violence if they were to vote to impeach this president. These lawmakers who voted to impeach simply said that, they couldn't be hamstrung by that. They couldn't let that stop them from casting a vote of conscience. And so in that way, it did take some bravery to do what they did. I should note that most, if not all of them, while they do share a lot of supporters with President Trump, they did better in their districts in the last election than President Trump did. So they may have felt that they had a little more wiggle room than some other colleagues to go ahead and take this difficult vote to impeach.
I think that's a great point, Nancy, that we've been talking about, are they willing to put their jobs on the line? It's not just their jobs. We saw on Wednesday that that all the stuff online can go offline very, very quickly and get out of control. So, Vlad mentioned that we wanted to talk more about the investigation. House Democrats are demanding an investigation. Perhaps it'll come in the form of a Senate hearing, but they want to know whether or not their Republican colleagues actually assisted some of the rioters. Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger spoke earlier on CBS this morning. I want to play some of what she had to say.
I have been told that they entered with members of Congress. Notably, some of the challenges that exist is that members of Congress have a lot more liberties when it comes to walking around the Capitol, when it comes, and understandably so. But even during a shutdown period because of the pandemic, it was limited to staff, but members of Congress are able to bring people in. We do have they give us the courtesy of whoever we deem can come in despite the closures. They allow it, or certainly don't argue back. So the way that these individuals would have entered the Capitol in the first place would have been with a member of Congress or making that possible.
And of course, Nancy, we already spoke about Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill saying that she saw Congress people taking individuals out on tours just the day before the riot. We're hearing from Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley saying that her chief of staff, when they barricaded themselves in the office, she went looking for the panic button only to find out that it wasn't there anymore, that it had been pulled out, and it was a panic button that they regularly use for drills, so they know that the panic button had been there before. What can you tell us about these accusations and the investigation and whether or not there's an investigation into all this stuff?
Well, this is really serious. And Congresswoman Sherrill told reporters yesterday that she has referred everything that she saw and knows to various investigatory agencies. So we know that this is being looked into. I want to talk about the significance of what Congresswoman Spanberger said, because what she said on CBS this morning really backs up what her colleague Mikey Sherrill had been telling reporters as well. And remember, Congresswoman Spanberger is a former CIA analyst. She is someone who is quite aware of her surroundings and who has been trained to observe irregularities. And what she says she saw the day before this uprising was an unusual number of members of the public milling around in her House office building, which again is a building that right now is closed off to everyone but lawmakers, a handful of their aides, and journalists, and then, of course, people who work maintaining the building. So the only way that these individuals, who she said were dressed clearly as Trump supporters, she could tell that they were, an unusual sight taking a tour here in the Capitol that's almost deserted. She said the only way that they could have gotten in, and I can confirm this, is by a member themselves, when they come into a House office building saying, these people are with me, you got to let them in. So we know that those people would have been escorted in by a member of Congress. Which member? We don't know, because clearly when she saw them, they weren't even with that member. They were just alone walking through a House office building, which again is a totally bizarre sight, because right now, buildings like the one I'm in right here, they're almost deserted because of the pandemic, and that has been the case for 9 months. So it's really unusual to see a group like that, and I think we're going to start hearing stories from additional members, because if Congresswoman Sherrill saw it and if Congresswoman Spanberger saw it, there's no doubt that other members of Congress saw the same thing, and that could give you another hint as to why the House Speaker has now suddenly ramped up security outside the House floor itself, a place that only lawmakers are able to go anyway, and now there are metal detectors outside of the House chamber for them to get in, something that has really been angering Republican lawmakers. But there is a very sensitive investigation underway now, perhaps by multiple law enforcement agencies, into whether any Republican lawmakers gave aid, comfort, assistance, information, preparation to any of these insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol on Wednesday.
You know, Nancy, I know we have to wrap this up, but I just want to, for our audience to understand, who would be in charge? Is Nancy Pelosi in charge of that investigation? In other words, I'm just trying to understand, if the Democrats have control of the House, does that mean that Nancy Pelosi ultimately is in charge of this investigation? And how do they stay on it? Because I know how things in a politically charged environment, certain things that need to be investigated don't get investigated, and depending on who's in charge. So I'm just trying to get a sense of who would be leading this effort.
So there are multiple investigations that are likely underway at once. You've got the political congressional investigations, but there's a committee that's being established just to look at what happened here and what the shortcomings might have been from a security perspective. There's the House Ethics Committee, which could also take a look at this if it appears that any members were involved and need to be punished politically. But then there's also the law enforcement investigation, and we haven't heard from any particular agency yet. Yes, we are the agency that is looking at this from a criminal perspective, and Congresswoman Sherrill didn't tell us yesterday which agencies she had referred this to. The FBI has told CBS News, one of my colleagues, that they're not the ones looking into it. So we don't know at this point which law enforcement agency is taking the lead here, but I expect that this is something that is going to be examined both from a law enforcement angle and from a congressional angle, because this is not tenable to have a prolonged period of time where lawmakers are suspicious of their own colleagues.
Indeed. All right, Nancy, thank you so much, as always. We appreciate it.
You got it.